Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have a liftoff.
What's up, Doom Nation, and welcome back. You are listening to the Two Doom Men podcast. As always, it's Skaggs and yours truly, the Captain. And we have a big show today with a big guest. Skaggs, you want to introduce our new friend?
Yes, sir. So we are joined today by presidential candidate from the Libertarian Party, Ter Maat. How are you doing, man?
What's
I'm
up,
doing
Mike?
great. It's a pleasure to be with you guys. And just so your audience knows, the three of us have been chatting for several minutes already. As I told you guys are talkers. You guys actually get a head start. So good for you. You're full
Thank
of energy, and your excellent show reflects it. If I have any criticism whatsoever, it would be, do you really want to welcome your guests as the doomed nation? Wow.
That's our
dark.
fans. That's our fans. We also have we also do reviews, and it's called the Doomed Reviews. You know, so
now
doomed
reviews
already.
can be doomed. That's okay. I don't mind doomed reviews.
Yeah, that's a funny that's funny. A lot of people always say that, and I tend to be a very much so optimistic person, not a nihilistic or black.
So no one's going to expect you to. No one's going to mix you up with someone who's dark by nature.
Definitely not. I'm more of the Michael Malice white pill style.
No, I get it. So. And good for you for being so. What is that up over your left shoulder? Unless I'm turned around, Mr. Skaggs. Yeah, up there.
This here?
Then a little bit to the side, further higher.
Oh, the skull.
There? Oh, that's that's a deer skull.
What is that going on?
That's a deer skull from a doe that I shot with my bow, I think last year or the year before.
Wow,
it's actually
that requires some skill.
Oh yeah, I love it, man. It's actually a camera mount that we mount one of the cameras on when we have guests in the shack here. And I put the skull on it to cover it when it's just me, and it kind of looks cool because it's it's like up there. So
no, it's very cool. As my children's generation used to say, he uses antlers in all of his decorating, which is a line from a Disney musical that is probably not quite lined up with your time.
Probably not, no. But I like putting antlers. I got antlers all over this place.
I'm still out here trying to get my first buck.
Yeah, I appreciate a buck, a deer, like the individuality and the beauty that comes with their antlers and growing them. Like it's not something to just be cast away. It's something to be displayed. It's really cool.
No, I agree. No two are alike. They're similar, of course, but no two are exactly alike. And I've seen, a couple of buck within a couple of days of each other that I thought might have been the same. But upon closer inspection, if you pay attention to their antlers, you can tell that they're different.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. When you do a lot of work with like the trail cams and stuff, you could almost name them off the trail cam and know which one's coming around your house or your property.
Yeah, I get that. We don't get a lot of deer action on our property. I live in the middle of nowhere, Virginia, east nowhere, Virginia, northeast nowhere, Virginia. And we'll get some activity around the property during hunting season when everybody's running, right?
Yes.
So we see them running twice this year during the relatively brief hunting season. We saw them cross in front of the house in the water, one going one way, and then 2 days later, one going the other direction. A tremendous technique, I thought, to cut across the creek when the Jeep Cherokee is unable to do so.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah, they're amazing, man. They will, we have friends that live down in Staten Island in New York City, and they've seen bucks swimming across the Reach, which is like the little part of the Hudson River. From New Jersey onto Staten Island. Yeah, there's no hunting in Staten Island. Yeah, it's amazing. They really are a tough animal.
I didn't even know there were deer on Staten Island. That's impressive.
Yep.
It's like a little bit of a refuge for them because they can't hunt them. Yeah.
So you get like all the super bucks over in Staten Island because you can't hunt them.
Exactly.
Just like all the turkeys run to the golf courses.
So Mike,
at least all the smart ones.
Yeah.
Thank you again for joining us, man. Before we get started,
absolutely, let's cover some less important ground like politics.
Yeah, of course, man. Before we get started, though, because we always forget, why don't you tell everyone where they can find you?
My home address or the website?
The website.
The website, yeah.
Well, my home address is actually on the website if anyone wants to stop by. The website, we have two websites. One is miketermaat.com, which is kind of tricky because you'd have to spell it right, but it's MiketerMaat.com. And then our platform, I'm running on a platform that we call the Gold New Deal. It's at goldnewdeal.org. Don't go to goldnewdeal.com because they'll try to sell you something, which is not a bad suggestion. I don't mean it's a bad idea at all.
Yeah,
it's just
I think investing in gold is a pretty good idea.
Yeah, it's all about the timing, unless you're a long run player, which a lot of people should be. But anyway, goldnewdeal.org is where our platform is, and they link back and forth if you can only remember one or the other.
Okay, very good.
So, Mike, what has possessed you to run for president of the United States?
What in the wide world of sports is going on?
Yeah, why?
Well, look, I think we have an important opportunity in 2024, which is what anyone would tell you, right? Anyone in the Libertarian Party would say that, although we might characterize that opportunity differently. But I believe that what I have to bring to the process is important. And so I view this as an opportunity to push the party in the direction that I believe that we need to go in order to take advantage of that opportunity. So I'm running a campaign that is very professional, that is based on policy, and that is based on the most transformative policies. We collect them all under the umbrella that we call the Gold New Deal. But I believe that that makes our campaign quite a bit different from what we've seen in the recent past. If you go back to 2012 and 16, and don't get me wrong, I'm a bit of a Gary Johnson fan. I think he's a good guy, but his campaigns didn't do a couple of things that I wish they had. They didn't put forward our principles in a really bold, brash, unapologetic sense. They didn't do it loud and hard, right? The other thing that they didn't do was differentiate from the Republican and Democratic parties sufficiently. You might remember in 2016, he famously characterized himself and our party as fiscally conservative like Republicans and socially liberal like Democrats.
Yeah, the old trope, right?
Right. Which is, by the way, not even true. But even if it were true, as a matter of strategy, it's not a good idea to develop your identity in the context of other parties.
Mm-hmm.
Our objective is to, sure, find common ground with Republican and Democratic voters, but not to see if we can share common ground with Republican and Democratic politicians. And no one is going to mistake me for a Republican or Democrat, or even someone who represents an amalgam of them. I'm running on a platform that completely distinguishes us from the other parties. And I back that up with the credibility that comes from not just one, but two careers in public policy and public service. I was a professional economist for a couple of decades. I was a police officer for 11 and a half years until about a year and a half ago, from age 49 to 60 as a second career. And so I talk a lot about criminal justice reform, and I believe it's easier for me to do so and more credible because I've been there and done that. I've seen some of the problems, and to be fair, some of the things that are worth keeping about the system. They may be fewer than the things that need to be reformed, but there is a difference. And I believe that if you're going to really differentiate yourself from the other parties, you have to lead with a tough, hard-edged group of principles. But that obliges you to back it up with real-world solutions. It requires a lot of credibility that I think other candidates can't quite get to in terms of background and experience. And that's real important because if you're out there, let me give you our party's perhaps most famous example, Ron Paul's most famous example. If you're out there saying, end the Fed, right? Most of us would say, that's a good idea. Mm-hmm. But there's a difference between when most anybody says it because they're frustrated by inflation and the Fed seems like a secretive, nasty organization, all of which is true. And when I say it, because as a professional economist, as someone who's dealt with the Fed for many, many years, I've met with the Fed in the Fed boardroom. I've had my banking industry research cited by the Federal Reserve Chairman. I've done a lot of work in and around the Fed. I know what I'm talking about. It's an organization that has to go, and I have a plan to do it. So it's not really a matter of having different policies all the time, but a willingness to go after them in a hard-edged fashion, because I know the truth of the matter is that we need institutional level change.
I agree with that.
Yes, we do.
I'd add there as well. Of course, I agree with you and the Fed and all that, but I feel like if you say that phrase to most people in America, they'd be like, "What's that?" Most people, I don't think most people even know what the Fed is, what it does, and how it's bad.
And if the media tells them to like it, they're gonna argue with it.
I think you're absolutely right, and it is true that you need different messaging for different groups, right? For the vast majority of people, you need to explain to them that inflation is not only bad for you, but it's a result of bad public policy. And bad public policy comes from the institutional arrangement that we have in place. It's not just a matter of, well, we need a different Fed chairman. Although I do believe that's true, that's not enough, right? We need to fundamentally change the institutional makeup of how our policy is put together when it comes to monetary policy and other policies, by the way. So that needs to be said, and that needs to be explained. You're right, that's not easy. And then there are other groups. There are donors, there are media folks who do understand a little bit about this, who will be taken aback, who will think that you're brash and may question whether you have all your screws tightened. But that's when you're getting their attention, and that's when you say, "Look, let me explain why." And then you're getting a little bit more traction than you would otherwise. So I agree with you. It's complicated.
It is.
And I think what you just said is important, because and now in this political climate, the second you say something that people don't understand or might not exactly align with them, you're the crazy one. You're crazy.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? They're ready to fight you. But I feel like something that's so important that
and by the way, I'm guessing you know by which you speak.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Arguing with people, Russiagate was, a hoax. No, he's guilty. Okay. But what you said, something that was important, is being able to explain to these people why you want to push forward this path, because people are misguided, people are uneducated. And I feel when it comes to politics, you just get that robot politic, you respond right from your notes. You don't sit there and actually explain what the benefits is going to be.
That's exactly right. And for us, we need to be able to make the case that we're in this for the long haul. This is, it's certainly not about me. It's not about our party, really. It's about Americans who are our brothers and sisters. And for no real other reason than the fact that they're fellow Americans. And their children and grandchildren, many of whom are not born yet. This is a long-run project, but it's also a long-run interest. In other words, a lot of the reason we want to change policy is for the benefit of people that aren't even around now. We believe that that's another reason why we need institutional level change, is because we need it to stick. And because we know that over the next couple of decades, individuals will come and go, but unless we make institutional level changes, it'll continue on the same railroad tracks in a bad direction.
Yeah, the bureaucracy is immortal, right? To some, or it seems immortal to some extent.
It does seem immortal and growing.
Yes.
Yeah, well, it's been growing nonstop. I mean, one big thing we need to do is cut down the size of the bureaucracy, Congress, the government. It needs to shrink tremendously.
Ultimately, why I can't, rock with any conservatives, because they haven't actually conserved anything over the past 100 years.
Not anymore. No,
Sometimes they've been the biggest proponents of growing the whole thing.
And this is what I meant by it's not true that we're fiscally conservative like Republicans, because they're not.
Then you wouldn't be at all.
We are.
Yeah.
So last kind of inside baseball question here, because there's been a lot of chatter amongst the Libertarian Party lately over what role does the Libertarian Party play or serve, especially in the 2024 election with the Mises Caucus coming into play and kind of concentrating on local level stuff. Like, what is your take on, like, what role does the Libertarian Party take in everything going on nowadays?
The Libertarian Party has to be a political party. It cannot be merely an activist group. And that's not to say that we can't have activists in the party, that many of us should be activists instead of politicians. Some of us should be podcasters. Everyone's got a different skill set, right? So I don't mean this at the individual level that everyone needs to do one thing or another. But as an organization, as the Libertarian Party, it needs to play a role in elections. Because if the party doesn't do it, nobody else will, right? Activists need to be activists. And the political party needs to be a political party. And the reason it's important is because elections provide opportunities to get your message out. There are opportunities to be heard that don't otherwise exist if you're not running for office. Those opportunities are not necessarily fantastic. Some are better than others, depending on what district you're in, depending on what state you're in, depending on what party you're in, certainly. But as far as libertarians go, we seldom get much opportunity. And we have to squeeze out of it everything we can whenever there's an election to be had. You mentioned the Mises Caucus focus on local elections. I think that's great. Focusing on local elections is terrific because the people that run in the local level do need assistance. When I ran for Congress in District 20 in Florida, I live in Virginia now, but we just moved here a year and a half ago. When I ran for Congress in Florida, after having lived in Florida for 20 years, the Mises Caucus helped me out, not only with, some background material, but they threw me a little bit of money. And honestly, and this may sound a little dopey, but for those of you who are listening who have been there and done that, you'll know what I mean. Just having someone else give a damn. It sounds a little corny, but when someone says, when someone says, you're not that big a jerk, right? You're not that big a loser. We'll throw you a few bucks and some advice. I got to be honest. It made my week. Maybe not my
validation is nice, yeah.
But yeah, a little support was really appreciated. So if the caucus feels like that's something that it wants to do, I am all behind it. They're doing some training, which I think is terrific. I don't know if you've looked at it.
Yeah,
I've looked at it a little bit. And the tour, of course, that they're doing. Members of my team have attended a couple of those sessions and just report fantastic things about it. So I think that that's terrific, just spreading the message and helping out local candidates. Now, the other thing that your question implies is, what's that got to do with the national campaign and presidential campaign? And I think that is a bit of a different, not completely different, but a little bit different animal, which also has its role and is important because there is an opportunity there to get our message out that doesn't otherwise exist also. It's different in the sense that there are different issues. It's different in the sense that there's a different expectation of what a national campaign, what a presidential campaign looks like, both from the standpoint of the professionalism and the messaging, but also from the individual. As we all know, if the American public, if the media, if donors don't look at you and say, I could imagine this person being potentially qualified and going all the way, maybe in some weird alternative universe, but I could imagine, at least it starts to make sense.
It's a popularity contest at the end of the day, really, right? So I agree with you.
It is. And if they can't imagine that about you as an individual, they're not going to, you can be the greatest thing since sliced bread philosophically, but they're not going to pay any attention. So you need to bring that. And you need to differentiate yourself with loud, hard advertising, messaging advertising early. And that's something that we have done a poor job in the past as well. So there's some different characteristics. And I do believe that those who say that we should not be focusing on the presidential campaign are misreading history. A lot of politics, it is true that all politics is local, but the success of national parties comes top down. You have to have the flag waved at the top in a way that resonates with people, because that's what they pay attention to. That's where we need to define ourselves. That's where we need to differentiate, define ourselves, so people know what the Libertarian Party is about.
I've said that in my criticisms of the party for years now, that we've been talking about this, that there's and it's growing. It's since we've started this podcast 3 years ago, you know, I've been corrected. But like, yeah, there needs to be that champion, that famous libertarian that everybody could get behind and cheer and go to battle with, you know, just somebody who's captivating and becomes a household name. You know, that's getting the message out. That would be
great. And even if, look, even if you can't achieve household names, which is the objective, right? Household name status is the objective. But even if you were to fall short of that, and I have no intention of falling short of that, but even if you were, the primary objective has got to be for the Libertarian Party to become a household name, and to people, for people to know what that means. Oh, yeah. That was that guy. He's got gray hair and wears a blue jacket. Mike something. I don't remember his last name, but I do remember what libertarians are all about. That was the anti-war party. That was, you know, they were really fiscally conservative. That was the idiot who talked about ending all the agencies. He wanted to pull out of Ukraine and end the FBI. I remember that guy. And so, you know, 2 years later, the congressional candidate comes knocking on your door. Oh, yeah, Libertarian Party. I get that. I remember what you're all about. What do you want to talk about? That's how you win. That's how you win. And, you know, folks who say we can't get to a significant portion of the audience, we can't get to a significant portion in the polls, are not reading the recent data. You know, Gary Johnson made it to double digits in the polls and his messaging stunk. Imagine if his messaging were good.
Right. I think that shows that there's a hunger, definitely.
Yeah.
And you always hear people complaining, like, damn it, I wish there was a third party. I hate both the teams. And then I'll be like, oh, there is. It's such a people's head sometimes. Yes.
Yeah, it's such a rare opportunity that the party has since 2016. Because back in 2016, you were either all Hillary or all Trump, or you didn't trust Trump and you didn't trust Hillary. Then in 2020, you weren't jumping the fence to join Trump. You know, people were still blindsided back then. So they just blindly voted for Joe Biden for just not voting for Trump. It's this rare opportunity where there's these two parties at war. There's a huge percentage of the population that feels abandoned, doesn't like this guy, doesn't like that guy. Well, welcome to the Libertarian Party. This is what we have to offer.
Yeah, these were good years, right, to like market yourself to everyone. And I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of time has been lost. So I am really hoping
was a missed opportunity.
Yes, I agree with you, definitely.
Both of the parties have crappy leadership. That's a big deal. Objectively speaking, I don't mean speaking as a libertarian, not philosophical. I mean, objectively speaking, nobody in the Democratic Party thinks that Joe Biden, you know, is their number one guy. I mean, if he's not president of the United States, nobody's backing that guy, right? Yeah. And Donald Trump. I mean, the best thing about Donald Trump is that he's, you know, against the man, against the system, against the government, which I personally appreciate. But as a personal matter, as a matter of character, or what, dedication to public service, I mean, you know, from what angle are you picking that guy, were it not for, you know, his anti-system positions?
Yeah, right. We've said often, it's like, I probably wouldn't sit, you know, most people wouldn't have dinner with him, you know, or want to have dinner with
I
him.
might vote for him, right? But I'm not having dinner with that guy. That's an important concept. And, you know, to your point, both of the parties have left behind what used to be their philosophical policy agenda. You know, Democrats aren't anti-war. And they're not even, you know, they're not socially liberal in any real sense like we are. We, as libertarians, we don't go around beating each other into thinking the same way, or else we're going to ostracize you.
Worry if
we
you have gas
argue.
burning stoves or not.
Right. We argue, we punch each other in the face, and then we go have beers. That's the way we do it in our party. And the Democrats just don't seem to understand that anymore. They used to be socially liberal in the way that they thought, but that's not really the case anymore. They're very dogmatic, very doctrinaire. And it's a little weird. And the Republican Party has left behind any semblance of fiscal conservatism. And so not only from the leadership point of view, but from the policy point of view, most Republicans are frustrated with their party, and Democrats the same thing.
Yep. Let's shift gears here real quick and get into a couple of actual topics that are in the national conversation at the moment. And I want to start with what I at least rank as the most important thing going on in the world right now, which is the war in Ukraine. So my first question to you is, do you want Ukraine to win the war?
Hey, don't be a nasty person now.
No, yeah. So
I want the fighting to stop. What
is your take on the whole thing? And as president, what would you do?
You've got to pressure. Well, and it depends on what point in time you come in on this, right? If you're to go back 18 months, you would say our position is going to have to be hands off. If you're going to go back 20 years, you would have to say we are not going to trick the government of Ukraine into giving up their nuclear warheads under this false premise that we're going to protect them. Nor are we going to be sending the signal to the Russians. We might admit Ukraine to NATO. We might bring NATO to your doorstep. That was similarly stupid for different reasons. So we've made a lot of mistakes. So anyway, fast forward to where we are now, you have to pressure both sides into ending this thing. The longer it goes on, the more likely it is that the proxy war that we're in, and by the way, it's not clear to me that we are merely in a proxy war. We are at least in a proxy war.
I think it goes deeper than that. Definitely.
Right. I mean, even the whistleblower documents have shown that there are some special forces on the ground, and the Pentagon's kind of.
We've got 1,000 people there.
Right.
Did an American just die yesterday in Ukraine, or earlier this week, and another American died in Ukraine? Why? Yeah. How'd that happen?
Yeah, so we're not really invested in the war. We're not fighting it ourselves, but the Pentagon is the brain of the entire operation, down to the tactics, and the special forces are making sure that vision gets carried out. But we're not involved.
And shame on you if you search for peace.
And shame on you if you search for peace. And by the way, we're also manufacturing goods for the war.
Right.
The stuff that we're sending is not 35 years old sitting out behind the barracks. We are rolling stuff off of assembly lines that's made just for that war. The president of the United States was there a couple of months ago. This is war. This is what war looks like, not merely a proxy war. So anyway, my point is that as this goes on longer, the chances of it expanding become greater and greater. If this expands in a significant way, then I think you've got to start worrying about, whether Russia's going to get its back up, its hair is going to stand on end, and it's going to start threatening shit that it feels like it needs to be able to back up. And you guys know what I'm talking about. The possibility of there being a nuclear warhead dropped as a tactical matter by the Russians becomes a non-zero possibility that would really put us in a bind. And that's not a bind we want to be in. You don't want to have to make that decision, because either way you go at that point is really horrible. You either back down and signal to the Russians you can drop nuclear warheads whenever you feel like exerting your power, or you punish them by going over the top, and now God only knows how that ends.
Yeah, so I won't send chills up the back of my spine, right?
So
there's no good off-road from when we get to that.
So this is to be avoided, and I think that this needs to be avoided by a settlement, by a negotiated settlement now. And I think that day one of a Libertarian presidency has got to be consumed with phone calls to both of these parties that says just that. This is going to end now. And you're not going to like the way things look if you disagree with me. And the communication to the Ukrainian government has got to say, and by the way, this isn't necessarily camera ready, but it's phone call ready.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to sound like we're going to pull out. So you got a lot of interest. You got a lot of motivation to settle this by Friday.
Yeah. No more
now, I'm
money.
going to give you 6 weeks, right? But I'm giving you the heads up now that clock is ticking. I am not going to, as a libertarian, I am not going to go back on my promises and ask the American public for another $100 million to prolong this for another. That can't happen. So I'm telling the truth, right? So this is going to be over in 6 weeks, one way or another. And you don't want to be out there not negotiating when we pull out. Then you got to tell the Russians, look, I'm telling our NATO allies that we probably want to pull out of NATO, right? And by the way, you're making a series of phone calls that same day to the leaders of the various NATO members, telling them it's time for you to step up to the plate. And we can argue all day long about whether you're being driven by irrational fear. I mean, to be honest, if you're Germany and you're actually afraid of being overrun by the Russian army, there's something wrong with you. Okay, but you do you. If that's your fear, that's not my advice. But we're no longer going to be your backstop. So if you really believe the fear mongering you've been putting out to your population the last few years, then you're going to have to step up and start spending 3.5% of your GDP on defense. The 1.9 is not going to cut it. So, that's the pressure you're under. By the way, we're going to get out of Ukraine. So if you really think that the Russians are a big threat, and you're really afraid that if they overrun Ukraine, that's going to lionize them to go after other areas in Europe, I don't believe that. But if you do,
right,
then you're going to have to step up and take care of Ukraine. Then you tell Putin exactly the same thing. The Europeans are going to be pissed. They are going to be really pissed.
Welcome.
So if you don't negotiate with me, we're going to invite them to come in a hot war that the American public doesn't want a part of. So we're going to create a vacuum. We're going to let the Europeans come in and you can fight them instead. But I got to tell you, they're going to push all the way to Moscow because they're sick of this. Those people really are scared. They're frightened. They're frightened of you. And by the way, you're giving them reason to be frightened. We might argue about the fact that they shouldn't be as frightened as they are. But, Putin is not doing a whole lot to allay their fears either. So you've got all kinds of incentive to negotiate with us also. And, if this does go on for another 6 weeks, we got to talk about what alternatives we have to bring this to a close. It wouldn't be the first time, and unfortunately probably won't be the last time, that the American government decided to surge resources in order to try to bring things to a close. Nobody wants to see that, Vladdy. So this has got to be negotiated over the next several weeks. Don't make a fool out of me, and I won't make a dead person out of you, and we'll move on and live our lives. But that's the approach I think that we need to take.
Yeah,
very good.
I'm definitely on board. I've always kind of framed it the same way. It's like I'm going to tell them both the exact same thing. Like, Ukraine, hey, you got only a little bit of time left here. We hold all the leverage on both sides. We hold all the leverage of propping up Ukraine, and we also hold all the leverage on making Russia not be able to win this thing at the same time. So hey, who is best positioned to end the war? The United States, right? Because we're the ones prolonging it at the moment as well. Yeah,
absolutely.
So
absolutely
good answer. I like that.
And none of that is to make it sound like it's easy, right?
Of course.
No, it's easy.
You're dealing with people with egos here, former KGB agents, all that sort of stuff. So,
right, and that's one of the reasons why you need to lead with principle,
and
that's why you got to campaign on principle, so that when you say, "I can't back up on this," they know that you're telling the truth.
Right.
Very good. So another question that we have for you, since you're big on like abolishing the FBI, you're not a big fan of the alphabet soup agencies. My
Oh,
question,
like you are.
yeah, I know. I'm a big fan of them.
Yeah, my shirt says "print guns, not money."
There you go.
So what's your plan for accountability from members of Congress, the media, big farm, these alphabet soup agencies? I mean, what just transpired this week is the FBI, they lied. They did not follow their mission. Treasonous as far as I'm concerned.
They broke the law.
Yes. Right. And so, when in the podcasting world, we put out there saying, oh, this is a Russia hoax. And then we get the pushback, and then we talk to the people, and they say, no, CNN said this, blah, blah, blah. And then now here we are months and years later with this proof. Now everybody who called us conspiracy theorists, the next question is, all right, so how's justice come about? How do we get accountability? So what's your plan for some of that?
The FBI is an interesting example. I think you've got 3 different buckets of stuff going on there. So
yeah, it's a big question, but we can narrow
it is
it
a
down
big
to
question.
the FBI.
Let's take the FBI as an interesting example right off the bat. Like the Fed, I don't think this is a problem that you can solve by replacing individuals or even holding individuals accountable. I think it's a systemic problem. If you look at the history of the FBI, and
sketchy history.
Yeah, it's very sketchy at best. Sketchy is giving the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, it's a good word. Right?
Yeah, keeping tabs on Americans, undermining Americans, not just keeping tabs, but actively undermining political movements, violating individual rights, actively, not just passively, all over the place. It's not right. It's slimy and it's not right. It is not an agency that is held accountable. But it's also not an agency that's really set up to be accountable. This is an agency that reports to someone who reports to the president. It actually reports to someone who reports to someone who reports to someone who reports to the president. And that's a weird thing. The FBI
a lot of distance in between the two.
Yeah. And I can't argue that having a direct report to the president would make it better. We spent decades arguing that the Fed needs to be at arm's length from the White House, because in most countries, the central bank is intimately tied with the executive branch, and the executive branch tells it what to do, and that's where you get all this inflation, money being printed.
Hyperinflation, right? Like in these African countries where they're,
and other places over the decades. So we understand that there has to be an arm's length relationship, but accountability at an institutional level is very difficult to come by. I would break up the FBI into pieces. If I can characterize the FBI as having a couple of different functions, one is to prosecute a bunch of crime that is also illegal in every state. For that bucket, you don't need an FBI. Okay, that's just ego driven and resource driven. That is something that every state has a state police force. Some are great. Some have just as many problems as the FBI. None is quite as politicized as the FBI. But anyway, that can all be allowed to the states to pick up. Then there's a piece that's absolutely just politically motivated, that comes at this discretion of the Department of Justice. That stuff we shouldn't be doing at all. That just needs to stop. And then there's all this counter-espionage stuff. If you really believe that that's true, and I'm not suggesting that it's not completely true, right? I think the FBI is a little bit paranoid, but it is true that there are espionage threats from time to time from other nations, especially online. This is where the resources need to be dedicated. To the extent to which there are real threats, we need an agency that's not by its nature political. And the most obvious example is the Army, which, by the way, already has its own intelligence services and has an interest in stopping espionage. So I would spin that part off to the Defense Department, and I would just sunset the FBI. Now, to sunset an
Be a
agency
beautiful day.
in Washington is a tricky thing, as anyone knows who's spent as much time there as I have, which is not a good thing, by the way. But one of the things that you learn is you can't get rid of an agency or a function until you make it as irrelevant as possible. And you need to take away its followers, its adherents, its supporters.
I think
That's
there's becomes like a
interesting
little,
to
it
say,
becomes a little institutionalized. Like they're like a gang, you know, like a
Too
motorcycle
big to
gang
fail. Yeah.
to an
Yeah,
extent.
you
right?
need to whittle them down.
Right. Like if the
It's-
president were, I've always said, like if the president were to just day one abolish the CIA,
Yeah, they'd open up a black
practically,
site.
does that
Yeah.
really happen? Would they, does, you know, their black sites, for example, right? Like, or whatever it is they have, they'll
need to
probably
pare
still
it
keep
back.
going. Right.
Yeah. What the president does need to do on day one is appoint leadership that is actually libertarian.
Right.
Even if it's a Democrat or Republican, it has to be someone who is a lowercase L libertarian, who actually gets it, who prioritizes individual rights.
Mhm.
And by the way, who is sensitive to the rights of other people who are not Americans. You know, even those in the blob who are pro American rights, most of them don't give a damn about the rest of the world, which is
It's
kind of
interesting to think
weird.
about. That's very
Yeah.
interesting to think about.
And it's kind of weird for a nation that holds itself out there as being exceptional because of our ethics.
Mhm.
So anyway, to your point, you have to put people in place. They're going to make the institution smaller, less relevant, and people who understand that it's their job to work themselves out of a job.
Yeah, I was going to say you're going to have to put people in position to close this position down. Yeah.
Right. Your job is to whittle it down over the next 2 years, and then as soon as we're on the other side of the midterm elections, help the White House move legislation to end the whole thing, or at least as much of it as possible. And
Right.
that's the same formula that has to be applied, for example, to the Department of Transportation and Education, who love to use block grants to keep themselves in the good graces of people all over the United States. That has got to end. You know, that is just some combination of bribery and extortion. You know, that is unconstitutional, sure, but it's moving toward evil. You know, if someone else were to do it, it would be a federal felony. You know, you are not allowed to offer money to public officials in order to influence their policy positions, but the federal government does it all the time.
Mm-hmm. I really like
That's
what you're saying here,
weird.
Mike. I'm interpreting what you're saying here as you need to have kind of a cultural change quickly within the organizations themselves. And I've always kind of said, like, if we're going to roll back any of the state, man, there has to be a real cultural change amongst Americans that they'd have to be more libertarian, because right now people seem to love big government. They want it to solve every problem of theirs. You know, this democratic socialism is on the rise. So I really do like what you're saying, because you're advocating for cultural change within the organization. You want to make the organizations want to close themselves.
Yeah, and that's an uphill battle. Ronald Reagan used to complain that he only had 400 presidential appointees that were Senate confirmed, and he felt like he needed more than that to influence a blob the size as it is. I believe he was probably right about that. But be that as it may, you need to use those 400 carefully. They have to be people who can withstand a lot of mashugana, you know, because you're going to catch it, right?
Well, yeah, the backlash from whoever has power in the FBI is going to be huge. Yeah.
Huge. The FBI is an interesting example because the leadership grows up inside the organization.
Mm-hmm.
That's a scary, scary thought. You know, you look at a guy like Andrew McCabe, who signed off on the investigation that we now know with certainty was a hoax, even though we were darn sure years ago that it was a hoax. He signed off on that investigation. He was eventually fired by the FBI, and he is now a highly paid, very prominent commentator on CNN.
Right.
The blob includes the media.
Yes, we had a great segment once where we read off all the former FBI heads, special agents, etc., and all the jobs they have at CNN, etc.
Facebook, Instagram,
the list was so
YouTube.
long we couldn't actually read them all. But yeah,
Right, it is enormous. And indeed, in a prior 2 lifetimes ago, I was in the banking industry. Very prominent leaders in the banking industry are former FBI, obviously mostly in the security area, but not all of them. Some of them are in the very top leadership positions, interestingly. That's how important security has become, and influence and ties to the government have become inside of the financial services industries. So my point is that you're going to catch it from inside the organization. You're going to catch it from the media. You're going to catch it from many folks in the American public who are used to seeing a certain way that things are done. It's not easy, but you do have to go after the blob. And the other thing that you mentioned was holding people accountable. Also not easy.
No.
And there's a couple of tracks. You know, one is you need to change federal policy to change, for example, law enforcement culture. You know, you got to end qualified immunity, not because it affects so many cases, but because it sends the wrong signals. The reason it's important is because police officers think it's important. You know,
I agree with that. You have such an interesting perspective because you were a cop.
Yeah.
And cops never seem to want to most cops at least do not want to get rid of qualified immunity.
Right. Well, nobody wants to lose their job because they made a mistake at work on some random Thursday.
Right.
And I get that. And that's not, you know, that shouldn't be the direction in which we're going. The way this should work is that you should be required to carry liability insurance like a doctor. Malpractice insurance, and you should be responsible for your own premium rates. So if you're a screw up, you're going to get priced out of the market.
Okay.
And the reason I like the idea so much, if I do say so myself, is that I like the idea of bringing in a private sector third party from the outside, an insurance company that's going to provide a check on the system. Because an insurance company is not going to put up with the bullshit that the unions put up. Politicians are stonewalled by unions from getting the information that they need and doing the things they need to do to hold agencies and officers accountable. And an insurance company is not going to put up with that. You know, if you want insurance, you're going to have to give us all the information that we demand. And that's going to be everything from personnel files to training records to the evaluations for raises. And eventually where we want to go is a system in which market forces prevail. You know, we want a system in which good cops get paid more and mediocre cops get paid less and crappy cops get fired. We want to be more like other industries. And we want politicians to hold them accountable, but so often they're politically captured. And that's why we like the idea of an insurance company coming in from the outside. But ultimately, we need to find ways to merge the community's interests with law enforcement behavior. That's just one example. And by the way, that applies to teachers also.
This is where libertarianism piques my interest, because I never thought of it in this manner. And I never thought of the type of immunity that police are given, where the good cops get paid just as much as the mediocre cops and the bad cops. But when you talk to a Democrat or when you talk to a Republican, they're not thinking like this. They're not bringing up ideas like this. And these are a third party idea that needs to get out there in front of 20 million people, you know, this is what the masses need to hear, these different types of ideas, that there is an alternative.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, because on the Republican side, so often you hear nothing but, you know, back the blue.
Yeah, law and order, yeah.
Yeah, no matter what. Back the blue in every case, no matter what. I mean, I'm a cop. I'm, you know, very pro cop. You know, I got friends who are cops. I was a cop. I understand it's hard work. And 99% of the people who do it mean well and want to do the best job they can. And I don't even say anything that dumb, right? And then the other side, you've got, well, you know, fewer cops, defund the police. You know, they should be replaced by social work. I mean, these are ideas that are truly
idiotic.
idiotic.
Where were all the social workers for Jordan Neely in New York City the 2 weeks ago?
Well, there's
right?
a video. Like, there's a video that came out of Seattle of it was either a car robbery. This guy was getting his ass beat, and there was two social workers, officers, whatever, just standing there on their phone, doing nothing. People around them filming them, going, "Do something, do your job," and they're just looking up in the air. They're looking everywhere, but the guy getting his ass beat in front of them. You know, what good is it really?
It doesn't do any good. The answer is that you need better officers, better training, and a better set of rules of engagement. We want officers who are less violent in general. We need to get rid of the ridiculously counterproductive war on drugs so the cops don't get distracted by silly stuff. Cops are still going to be involved in drug cases because so often, you're the first one there. I've done CPR on far more young men overdosing on drugs than, I had to worry about the legality of the situation. Thankfully for me as a libertarian, our department had a separate group that worried about most of the drug related enforcement. So, cops are going to be involved, but you want a police officer who's well trained to handle the full panoply of stuff that comes up. It doesn't make sense to have one type of person go to one type of case and another person goes to another type of case because you don't know what it is until you get there.
Of course. Yeah.
The 911 call comes in and it's, I'm having an argument with my wife. Okay. That covers a lot of ground. That covers everything from, oh, officer, I'm glad you're here. We can't seem to figure out what to do with our son, to my wife's not here.
Where is she? Yeah.
That is not a call that you can send a social worker to.
Right.
Yeah, I get it. It's a mystery box, any call you might go to. And it doesn't even necessarily mean even if you're a police officer. Like I'll bring up again this Jordan Neely thing going on in the city. I mean, those people on that subway car, they didn't know what to expect, what was about to happen. And some of them just responded and took matters into their own hands. And it just didn't turn out well for anybody at this point. Cops get put into the same situations. That's their job, to get put into the same situations. So,
and sometimes you screw up. And sometimes cops screw up because they're bad people and they're badly trained, or because they really have bad intentions, or because they don't appreciate individual liberty, or for whatever reason, right? There are people who are not good at this. And sometimes good cops just flat out screw up, just make a mistake. And I get that too. And that's why when somebody acts in good faith and screws up, we're not saying we need to take you out behind the barn and shoot you. But the idea that an American should not have an ability to seek redress in court, I think is unconstitutional. I think it's un-American. It's not the way the system should work. You don't say to your surgeon who cut off the wrong foot, well, you didn't mean it, so it's all good, right?
Right. Yeah, but you're shit out of a foot after all that. Right, exactly.
Right.
It'll grow back.
So it's not merely a matter of accountability. It's a matter of justice and seeking redress and how to resolve these situations.
I really do like the insurance kind of proposal here. Just thinking from work, and I won't go into too much of what I do, but with insuring my employees in order to drive the company vehicles. Like if they don't do good with the company vehicles, that's going to impact the insurance company's rates on us. Therefore, we are invested in making sure that they do the right thing with
the my driving?
Right, exactly. Right. It's a natural balance on their behavior in a sense. It's a similar concept for police officers.
Well, that's right. And unfortunately, typically the way it works is, the city, the municipality, the county, the state will take care of costs of resolving cases, but the police department and the police officer don't feel any pinch.
Right.
And I'm not saying that, like I say, you made a mistake at work, you need to lose your house. but you ought to be responsible for your premiums in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
At the very least, the police department should be responsible. So at least your boss is pissed, right? So at least it comes out of the budget, at least the premiums, if not the settlement, at least the premiums come out of the departmental budget. You know, we're not getting new cars for another 6 months, right?
You screwed up.
Yeah, because we got to settle Bobby's screw up last week.
And it puts in a place of holding each other accountable, thinking before you act. The guys who have, you know, not 1% of police have that attitude of power and F you, I am the law. It holds people like that accountable. So the 99% of the good police can carry on with their day. And then you'll see almost immediately, I guess within a year, you'll see, oh, look, police, you know, this county they had no infractions. It's a great, crime's down. People are happy.
Things are improving.
Yeah, you'll see within a year where the problem is, who the problem is, what leadership's the problem. I think you'll be able to clean it up within a year to 2 years.
You've introduced accountability to the system. I agree.
It's like school choice. It may take a long time, but you see some effects pretty quick, which brings up the idea that we also need competition among the agencies themselves. Where I worked, our city only really had two choices. One was us, and the other choice they could have fired us and hired the sheriff's office to police the town, right? They liked the idea of having their own police department because they figured they had more control over us, which I think is largely true. Unfortunately, in my view, they didn't use it. You know, the mayor should have been saying, I want to be involved in soup to nuts. I want to be involved in hiring, training, ongoing training, who gets hired, who gets fired. Imagine how powerful it would be if the mayor of some town went on TV or took out an ad in the New York Times and said $100,000 social media campaign and said, I'm looking for the best. I'm not going to jerk around about whether I'm going to start you at 50,000 or 60,000. I'm going to start you at $100,000. I'm going to work my way up to 150. Now that I have your attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go with 90 officers instead of 100. So you're going to work your ass off. You do a good job, I'll pay you more. You do a bad job, I'm going to fire you. I'm going to reserve the right to fire you just because I don't like the way you dress one day. I'm that boss.
You sound like a capitalist.
I sound like a capitalist because I'm running a town that deserves the best. Now, if you're interested, you know, you got literally thousands of other agencies in this country that'll pay you the same whether you do a good job or not. So if you're interested in that, go knock yourself out. But if you're interested in pursuing excellence, give me a call. Here's my phone number.
Right.
Imagine how powerful that would be, and imagine who makes that call. Imagine who answers that.
Right, the best.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it could be contagious again. Like the proof would be in the pudding later on, and that could become a contagious.
Yeah, the
and
testing,
imagine how
the
cool
training levels. Yeah.
Imagine how powerful it would be to have that in your resume.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to work for that crazy mayor down in Kentucky who said that he wanted nothing but the best. I only spent 3 years with him. I'm exhausted.
Yeah, right.
But I was well trained, and I'm looking for an opportunity to teach some other agency how to behave the same way.
Yeah, we'll make yourself more valuable. So,
absolutely,
Chris. Next topic, or probably the last topic. Go ahead, you pick it.
Do you want to do the border, or should we?
I think so. I think we have to go into the border.
What border?
Yeah,
yeah. Well,
the
border.
I think we have to go into that one because you have such a unique perspective. I've saw the videos. You've been there.
I gotta say, I'm very pro-Canadian. I don't know why you guys are so worried about this.
No, I think we should build a damn wall up there. I don't want no more
yeah.
Canadian communists coming down here. And and all that stuff. So yeah, Mike, what do you think?
There is no escargot like Montreal. Look, you're right. I have been down to the border, and I have to admit, and this is not necessarily something I'm proud of, but I have to admit it changed me. I went down there thinking, how are we going to apply our libertarian principles to coming up with a solution? And it wasn't really until I got there that I fully understood what the problem was. And and the extent to which human trafficking has really become, in my view, the problem.
Billion-dollar industry with a B.
I was really moved. I sat with a representative of one of the counties who damn near came to tears just telling me the stories, who had to show me videos because it was too difficult to audibilize some of the stuff that their deputies were going through. Very difficult situation. Yeah, I met with CBP people. I met with ranchers on the border and talked to a bunch of libertarian leaders down there. And they all had a strong sense of how bad this human trafficking situation is. They didn't necessarily have solutions, right? But this is something that is really evil. You know, we have created, inadvertently, we have created something that's really dark, just really, you know, war level bad stuff is going on at the border. And, you know, we're not talking about hundreds of people, right? We're talking about thousands, tens of thousands, over time, hundreds of thousands, and potentially millions of people who have been caught up in the black market and therefore been exposed to and have been taken advantage of by people who will take advantage of black markets. The human trafficking on both sides of the border, as you guys probably know, they have these, what they call coyotes, of course,
Yep.
people who bring you to the border for a fee that you cannot afford,
Right.
hand you off to someone on the other side, coordinating by cell phone and by other apps that use satellite, because cell towers out there are few and far between. They coordinate with someone on the other side of the border. They get you into a car, the fee for which you also cannot afford, and they take you away. And they don't
And
take you
wherever
to
you end
a
up
place.
is where you end up.
Yeah, where you end up is where you end up. And one of the stories that was shared with me is, as every cop knows, you know, the danger of being in a high-speed chase. And the reason so many police departments have told us not to chase anymore for almost anything, you know, short of a violent crime, and you know it's the right guy. Short of that, you're not chasing. You know, the department I worked for, we don't chase for burglaries or stolen cars anymore. Nothing. Because the chase is so dangerous. And the rep from the sheriff's office said, "Do you have any idea how difficult it is to tell people not to chase? Because they know what's going to happen if they get away. There is almost nothing I can do to discipline my guys to stop them from chasing."
Mm-hmm.
Because they would rather risk their lives and their careers than to let one more asshole get away.
It's such an evil
just letting
act.
the
They
bad
know
guy
on
win.
the other
Yeah.
side, right? They're compelled to act
Yeah.
morally, right? I understand.
And all of this comes from the creation of black markets, and black markets come from the government criminalizing something, or at least making it illegal one way or another, something that our culture is not ready to give up. You know, whether that's drugs, prostitution, abortion, you name it. We create black markets that are so dangerous. You would have thought we would have learned this in Prohibition 100 years ago, right? But we don't learn this because we keep imposing one group's cultural values on public policy and then trying to affect all the people that we don't agree with in terms of culture with that public policy. And we need to learn that you can't stop something the culture is not ready to stop by criminalizing it, because that's trying to affect culture with public policy. And as we all know, it's got to go the other direction.
Don't work. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I could real quick. I was on a show last night, or they're our friends, they're Trump guys, and I made sure to make the point to them. Look, I understand Trump wants to fix the border problem, but at the same time, he's talking about doing more of the war on drugs. Those two things conflict with each other. Please, I'm like, please give up the war on drugs thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to execute drug dealers. Oh my God, it's been a
terrible.
failed policy. It's not going to make
so
us any
bad.
better.
And if you saw what the war on drugs does to families and underprivileged communities, it would break your heart. You know, we used to say, I used to tell all my trainees, if you weren't an economist before you became a cop, this job will make you an economist. because you see the effects of bad public policy up close and personal. Once you start falling in love with your community, and you will start to wonder about the policies that set all this in motion: bad housing, bad schools, bad zoning policies, over policing, the war on drugs. You put all that into a blender, and what you come out is very persistent intergenerational poverty. So you're right, that all has to end. The fentanyl problem kills people, not because fentanyl is a particular type of drug per se, but because of the fraud that surrounds it, because there is no trustworthy commercial market. And so it's a dangerous thing that kills people, because the combination of addiction, the combination of that with fraud, and that's what black markets do. So in my view, the border has to be cleaned up in a way that accommodates the reality of the market and brings it out into the light. I believe we need a much more pro-immigration policy and a much more pro-immigrant policy. And that means surging resources to the border. I'm not a big fan of federal resources doing anything, but if there's one thing the federal government ought to do, it's what the state of Texas asked it to do when it seceded in the 1860s, and that is bring resources to the border to bring some order to this. So I believe that we need to have the resources there to vet people through in a rapid fashion. I remind people that when I worked for the White House, we used to be able to vet people through in 90 minutes. But you're telling me it takes 11 years to make up your mind whether to give someone a green card.
Yeah, that's just lunacy.
With all the
It's
technology
stupid.
and the growth of all these
Well, it's
right, the apparatus, but it takes longer now.
it's by design. They created the problem to talk about the problem, to be the solution to the problem.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Watching the
And a
Democrats on
libertarian
this thing is so fascinating. I mean, they don't have anything. They have nothing on this issue. I don't even know what their position really is, to be honest.
Open borders. I mean, that's what it's got.
A libertarian president would disappoint a lot of people who are political hacks, right, in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, because I believe that a libertarian agenda could actually bring some order. While you're minimizing the resources in the Department of Defense, which we haven't spent enough time talking about, but the Defense Department has to be shrunk.
Of course.
And dramatically, by the way, not just limit the rate of expansion. That's going to free up any number of Army officers. Get where I'm putting them.
Right.
That's right. I'm going to make some use out of those people, because I got to tell you something. Vetting people at the border is not brain surgery. You don't need 3 years of Yale Law School to figure out whether someone meets certain criteria. Now, we need to change those criteria, because I hate the idea that you're discriminating against people who want to come here for economic reasons. As far as I'm concerned, if you live in the Western Hemisphere and you don't want to come to the United States for economic reasons, there's something wrong with you.
Right, of course.
Yeah, that's pretty smart. Yeah.
So I don't like the rules that we have, but be that as it may, for the moment, we need to have the personnel down there to vet people through rapidly. And that's going to end the black market pretty quick. Now, yeah, you need to get control of the rest of the border, but the reason you're doing it is not to prevent people from coming in. It's to tell them this is not the way to come in. You have to go to one of the processing stations, because that's where you're going to get your green card. And we're going to issue green cards same day or next day, right? Because the idea of telling people we'll let you in, but you can't work.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Defeats the whole purpose.
I was laughing this past week at AOC, who was making this point in New York City, where she was like, we have to do something to get, the wave of migrants coming into the city. Then she was, I think, arguing with Mayor Adams about their ability to work. And I almost wanted to tag accidental libertarian takes. I'm like, oh, look, AOC is kind of a libertarian now. She doesn't want government regulation on people's ability to work. She wants them to just be able to work and the government not be involved.
I would rather we had a system whereby which, now I just made this up in my head, so this may be a dumb idea, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. I would rather we had a punch card that said, Here's your card. As soon as you come in, you get this card. I want to see